Age of Overlord is currently having its content creator reveal week, and that means a breakdown of legacy support as well as free agents. It also means that we get a lot of box openings, and of course that means the reveals of TCG exclusives, two of which have already been leaked and translated as of Thursday, which is actually when I'm recording this video, although I'm probably not going to release it until Saturday because I don't want to get banned by Konami for sharing these leaks early. They've really been cracking down on that. Anyways, the two cards are creating a pretty significant buzz on Twitter and other various online forums, and I just want to talk about the cards because some people are saying that the cards are broken while others say they suck, and I feel like breaking them down. So the two cards are a pair and they work completely in tandem, which actually makes it significantly easier to cover them. The cards are Gin, the Diamond Tiger, and Kin, the Warrior Dragon. Yes, their names rhyme, so that just kind of alludes to the fact that they're supposed to work together. They're both level 3 light warrior monsters, however their stats are pretty different, with the Tiger having super high defense and a fairly low attack, while the Warrior has more balanced stats. Both monsters share the same exact first effect, where they return themselves to the hand at the end of the battle phase, which is in all honesty not very important, and it's the second effect that is the important part that we're really going to focus on. So Gin the Tiger says during your main phase, you can special summon one Kin the Warrior Dragon from your deck or hand to your opponent's side of the field in defense position. If this card is special summoned by the effect of Kin the Warrior Dragon, you can discard one card, or excuse me, discard one card, not optional. Kin on the other side, its counterpart, states that during your main phase, you can special summon one Gin the Diamond Tiger from your hand or deck to your opponent's side of the field in defense position. If this card is special summoned by Gin the Tiger, your opponent draws 2 cards, then discards 1. So in layman's terms, each one will summon the other from the hand or deck to your opponent's side of the field. Then the monster that you summon to your opponent's side of the field is going to trigger. You either summon the Tiger for your opponent and you force them to discard 1 card from their hand, or you summon the Warrior for them and you get basically a Baby Graceful Charity, or I guess a Dugaris effect to be more accurate. Either way, you're getting a pretty good effect in exchange for giving your opponent a level 3 monster. I think that both effects are pretty strong. Obviously, drawing cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been really good, and even a simple hand rip can be pretty brutal at times, especially if your opponent's hand is not that good. Now, just ask the Chimera deck how good that can be, but we do have to differentiate because it is not a random discard, so it's not going to be as devastating as it could possibly be, and there could be some matchups like against tier elements where you probably don't want to ever risk activating the effect, because if they ever have, I don't know, a shuffler or one of the mill 5s, you could definitely be in trouble. What's really important to note with Kin and Gin is that they're very much like Dark World Ceruli, where when you summon these guys to your opponent's side of the field, they trigger and it's considered that your opponent activated a monster effect, even though you're the one who gave them a monster and effectively forced them to do so. Now, some people might say, why is this important? This is important because there are some cards with the word tactics in their name, some very, very popular spell cards in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! That see a lot of play and are very powerful. Triple Tactics Talents, Triple Tactics Thrusts, and these cards will be live immediately when you resolve these effects. So for instance, you could draw 2, then discard 1 to resolve the monster effect, then activate talents and draw 2 more cards, which a draw 4 on your first turn sounds pretty incredible. Or you could have your opponent discard 1 from their hand, and then you could talents them, look at their entire hand, and then shuffle back their best card or whatever card that you don't want to play against, and effectively you would have ripped 2 cards from their hand. With Thrust specifically, I feel like the world is your oyster because your opponent will have a monster on their field, so you can pull pretty much any power spell or trap card from your deck. Heck, you could even pull talents from your deck, and that would just be an easy way to kind of make that combo work. Now, this is a 2-card combo, and obviously those are somewhat situational. Some people could argue that they aren't super consistent, but at the same time, these cards are both searchable by reinforcements of the army because they are warriors, so it gives you a little more, I guess, ways of getting to them. And you could also just play Thrust and Talents at 3 in your deck. There's some competitive decks right now like Tier Elements and Unchained and just other various decks that can already do that. And if you activate the draw effect, you are putting yourself that much closer to being able to see those cards, especially once again if you are running 3 of them. I think that these cards are pretty strong, at least in a vacuum, and they have very easy to use effects. But I think the one question that most people will ask when they look at these cards is, where is a practical place that we can play these cards? Because without that, then how much potential do they really have if they're very powerful cards, but there's no decks that you can effectively use them in? I've heard people talk about summoning them off Isode, and I think that Neospace Connector and Aqua Dolphin are probably better for most Isode decks, especially something like Infernoble. You'd rather just have those cards. They're just, I think, a little more effective at just being your opening normal summon. Maybe PK Phantom Knights could be like an exception because these are level 3, so in theory they could be ideal for setting up some Cherubini plays. Phantom Knights can also technically play Isode with the equips, and Phantom Knights are pretty good for discarding. If you use the draw 2 and then discard, there's a lot of PK cards that work in the graveyard. The monsters often have effects where they can search the traps, you can banish them to summon the monsters, etc, etc. Believe it or not, I think that there is another deck though that is absolutely ideal for these cards. And at first I wasn't really sure, but a friend of mine started talking about Dark World, and that's where I think that these cards could absolutely be amazing. So Dark World does not have a dedicated normal summon in the conventional terms of, like, you know, purely the cat deck or Unchained, where it's like you always have this specific 1 or 2 monsters that you want to normal summon. In Dark World, for the most part, it kind of comes down to, at some point in your combo, just normal summoning a random vanilla or a random level 4 or level 3 monster like Brow or Snow or something like that, and then bouncing it for Grapha or Rainbow shenanigans, etc, etc. But the thing is, a lot of times when you're comboing and you really have the Dark World deck rolling, you can already get those monsters on field via special summoning anyway, so it's not something that's like an absolute requirement. If you look at both of the effects, they work really well with what Dark World already wants to do. Your end goal a lot of times, if you're going first with Dark World, is to rip a bunch of cards out of your opponent's hand with Silva. I mean, you have an effect with Gin that does that, as well as you want to draw a million cards and discard a bunch of cards with Dark World, because that's just how the deck naturally works, and Ken does that. Ken is basically Dugaris, which Dark World are known to make in their opening turns as well. Another reason that I think that these cards have absolutely incredible potential when it comes to the Dark World deck is with Ken specifically. When you have the draw and discard effect, it is considered that your opponent is making you discard. So for instance, if you were to draw 2 cards and then discard a Silva, not only would you be able to special summon that Silva back to your field, you would take 2 cards out of your opponent's hand. So you would get a very, very easy hand rip that's just like a 2-card combo, and you would just go plus infinity. I mean, I know your opponent gets a monster, but I really don't think it's going to be all that good. Dark World is also another deck that religiously runs Triple Tactics Talents, so you could follow that play up by either drawing more cards or just ripping your opponent's hand even further to just take away all their resources. And I guess you could argue on the downside that Ken and again are susceptible to like low impact hand traps such as Ash Blossom, Imperm, and Effect Veiler, but those are cards that traditionally are not known for stopping Dark World very often, because Dark World just has so much draw. If your opponent is using their low impact hand traps on Ken and Gen, I think that you're pretty satisfied with that. Very similar to Infernoble when it summons Neospace Connector. Usually it's like, okay, if this doesn't eat a hand trap, then I'm gonna rip a hand trap out of your hand. So you kind of have to, you know, use it in that sense. Also, when it comes to Infinite and Permanent specifically, your opponent basically has to use that card against these specifically because you are forcing a monster on their field. So if they don't Imperm you on the effect, then once they get a monster, they're not going to be able to use Imperm for the remainder of the turn. But you guys let me know what you think. Do you like the new TCG exclusives, and where do you think that they could be played? Anyways, thank you guys for watching as always.